You're listening to the 5-Minute Friday podcast episode of The Aligned Self. This is your host, Daniel J. Neuville. Okay, 5-Minute Friday, a short and concise podcast episode of The Aligned Self, designed to leave you with a question, an idea, a strategy, a tip, a hack, in order to give you greater access to your conscious awareness, evolving your conscious awareness, or give you greater mastery over your mind. Hello, friend, and welcome into this 5-Minute Friday. Earlier this week, at the beginning of the week, I did an episode called The Coming Shift in Consciousness. And I've been asked to do a follow-up. What are the symptoms? What are the characteristics that signify that you might be going through an up-leveling of your consciousness, increasing your conscious awareness? Because there's some definite things that occur in your psyche, in your body, and in generally around your life. Now, the value in having this information is that you get to know that you're not necessarily going crazy, because sometimes it feels that way. I went through this by myself. I didn't really have a guide, and I'll be talking about, and I decided that I'm going to do an entire episode, and it'll be next week, and it's going to be a deep dive. I did a recording, and it's over an hour, and I'm going to have to pare it down and make it more concise, because I found myself rambling a bit. So you can expect that next week. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the power of acceptance. Now, this is a superpower, and you need to put it in your spiritual arsenal, inside your toolkit. Acceptance is choosing things as they are and not wishing that they were some other way than the way they're showing up. The opposite of acceptance is not accepting things. That makes sense, doesn't it? Sounds very apparent to me. No, it's resisting accepting. It's in the resistance. Acceptance is being open and receiving. Yes, it sucked, but it was what it was. And in accepting it, you're not saying you condone it. And we can use the example of personal trauma or a subpersonality, a part that we've left behind. Maybe you were a cheater, maybe that you are a liar, maybe you had conduct unbecoming. And there's a part of you that rejects that younger self, rejects that aspect or that period of life that you were in. Well, it was what it was. You were going through what you were going through. You were doing the best you could with what you knew at the time. And this is a fundamental presupposition of neuro-linguistic programming. We always do the best we can, given the resources we have at the time that we were doing that. If we could do better, we would do better. A lot of people resist this because they remember back, they reflect back, and they say, when I was involved in that, when I was engaged in that activity, I knew I wasn't doing the right thing. I knew I was getting in trouble. I knew I was outside the rules. I was breaking a promise. And yes, we often have a part of ourselves that is monitoring, that is the witness to our bad behavior. But there's another part of us that was actually in control, doing the best it could with the circumstances at hand. You see, if you were to put yourself, and I do this and I talk about this every time, if you put yourself back in time, in that moment, thinking what you were thinking, feeling what you were thinking at that moment, with the fears that you had, with the amount of sleep that you had, maybe you were hangry. You just had limited resources in that moment to make a good choice. Maybe you were afraid of looking bad. When you really think about it, all those circumstances were there. And if they weren't there, you would have made a different choice, but they weren't. So you made the choice that you made. If you were to put yourself back in time, feeling what you felt then, knowing what you felt then, you would choose the same thing all over again. This falls in the realm of self-acceptance. Now, in accepting ourselves, we're not condoning our behavior. We're saying, I can reflect back on myself. I can look back at a moment in my life and say, yeah, I was a cheat. I was afraid. There was lots of different things that were going on at that moment. And I could make myself wrong. And not that I'm making myself right. It just is what it is. I was not operating at the highest level of my inner resources, to say it kindly. I accept that. And in the future, I can adopt a new standard of behavior. I can actually use that experience knowing on how bad things turned out, that it will never, ever happen again. You see, it doesn't matter how good you are, it's how good do you want to be. The other aspect of acceptance is when bad things, quote unquote, bad things happen to us. Maybe we're at the effect of traumatic experience. Maybe we were at the effect of emotional or physical abuse. Maybe we witnessed an event that we wish we would not have. And as a consequence, most people that have gone through that live in the idea that I cannot accept what happened. Again, acceptance is not condoning what happened. Accepting it is choosing that it happened, not resisting that it happened. See, what happens when we resist it, when we say it shouldn't have, couldn't have happened that way, it just shouldn't have, we're faced with the reality. It happened. And so in that dissonance, that internal dissonance, cognitive dissonance between what happened and the way we thought it should have happened or could have happened, we suffer. We are at the effect of suffering when that happens. And so what we do is we accept it. Yes, it happened to me. I was at the effect. I was victimized. But that's the past. And you can choose whether or not to recall that story from the past into the future and continue to live it, or you can accept it and release it and saying, I'm not going to allow it to define my life. You see, the mind cannot hold two thoughts at the same time. And so you can either have the story of your victimization or the story of your healing. Either way, you get to choose. Another component of acceptance is when we are attached to a particular outcome. We have an expectation, and maybe it does not come to pass. We're disappointed, but we can't change it. Once our expectation is shattered upon the rocks, we get to accept it. Oh, that didn't happen the way I expected. Then what's next? How does this now serve me? What does this now make possible? And I've used this analogy several times, and I'm going to probably use it until I die, and that is don't cry over spilt milk. It's a waste of energy. Once it's spilled, clean it up, pour yourself another glass. By focusing on what could have happened, should have happened, but didn't happen is wasted energy. And so before I end this, you're going to ask me, how do I accept it? If I don't want to accept it, how do I accept it? Well, you just accept it. You choose it. You recognize the fact, I don't want to accept this. I wish it wouldn't have happened, but I choose it. It did happen. There is a level of practicality about this. You just acknowledge what is so with no drama about the way it should have, could have happened, and evidently did not happen. And in accepting it, then you can release it. You can let it go. And what does it take to let something go? Again, you choose it. You choose to let it go. You choose to drop it. So I'm going to ask you, what in your life can you accept? What can you choose that, something from your past that you have been resistant in choosing? You have tried to push it down, push it aside, keep it in the shadows, but it keeps coming up. If you were to accept it, then you could let it go. And in letting it go, you open up to something new in the future, something new in this very moment. Now, this is going to be a critical skill in the coming years, the coming months, as things shift and things move at an accelerated rate. Things aren't necessarily going to be the way you thought they would as you forecast ahead. Your expectations may get cast upon the rocks. And what do you do when that happens? Oh, isn't that interesting? Isn't that fascinating? You accept it and you move on. You dust yourself off, pick yourself back up, and you get marching down the road. Because you know that the alternative is suffering and a waste of energy, a waste of time. Because bemoaning the fact that something shouldn't have happened, couldn't have happened the way it happened, is just wasted energy. Until next time, this is your friend and host, Daniel de Neuville, urging you to follow your bliss. Live your life from inner signals. Be inner directed as you engage in the epic adventure.